This is session 1B, Making Taiwan in Conflicts. I'm the chair of the session. My name is Dominic Yang. I'm an associate professor of East Asian history at the University of Missouri, Columbia. Now today, in this panel, we have three very interesting papers, and I'm proud to say that, I know our panelists personally. They all serve on our association, the North American Taiwan Studies Association, in different capacity. And for that, deeply appreciate it. Okay. Now, our first speaker here is Professor Rita Chang, or Zhang Zhuqi. Rita is Project Assistant Professor at Global Health Program, School of Public Health in National Taiwan University. She's got a PhD in Communication Studies from the University of Texas, Austin. Now, she is the reigning president of the North American Taiwan Studies Association. And again, we'd like to thank her for her service. And she's also have been an activist for LGBTQ plus rights, in which that's going to be what the paper is about, in a sense. And also on her track record is that she has been put up as a political candidate for the Green Party for the 2020 legislative yuan election. Okay, so the paper that she is going to present today is Making Taiwan in Family Conflicts, the model of scaffolding family reconciliation. She is, it's a very interesting paper. I read the paper. She is going to tell you how, LGBTQ individuals in Taiwan communicate their identity to their loved ones, their parents. And it's not as simple as just the act of coming out of closet. Coming out of the closet is a very complicated process, which she will tell you about. Now, our second speaker, Joanne Wu or Wu Zhihan, she is, have you graduated? Almost on the verge of graduation from her PhD studies at Department of Drama and Theater at UC Irvine. Her dissertation looked at the puppetry for performance as it related to Taiwanese society. Her dissertation is performative reenactment of Taiwan through puppetry. And for today, she is going to present a paper that's on I guess it's the video game, not the movie. Right? If you watch the movie Detention, the horror movie that portrays white terror sort of experience and history in Taiwan, and she is not going to talk about the movie. Well, the paper is about the original video game that was published in 2017, and she has this very interesting theory on how the control, because the player controls an avatar that plays a role in the game. And for her, that's a form of puppetry. And it's a form of reenacting white terror history and reenacting Taiwan social relations, or our present-day imagination of that relationship in white terror history. So she's going to tell you all that. And our third speaker today is Zhang Yongyin Chang. She is a PhD student in the Department of Sociology at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. Her MA thesis at National Taiwan University has won a prestigious prize. It's entitled Everyday Nationhood, the Practice of Taiwanese Fandom in Transnational K-pop. So it's really unusual for a sort of paper or study that looks at the cultural realm of such as K-pop to discuss how people's national identity or their political stance actually evolved like that. And I guess this is why the dissertation has won a prestigious prize in Taiwan. And so she's going to tell you part of her research, I believe, from that dissertation. So without further ado, I'll turn over the floor to our first speaker. Please go ahead.
Hi everyone, my name is Rita Zhang, and I am the current president of North American Taiwan Studies Association. And it's really my pleasure to be here. I actually didn't expect anyone to be here, so thank you for spending your time here. And I would like to introduce, this is the incoming president of NATSA, Joanne Wu. And then our third presenter, who's online today, is unfortunately she tested positive for COVID 2 days ago, and she will be the incoming program director of NATSA. And I'll just spend a little bit of time talking about NATSA. So North American Taiwan Studies Association was founded in 1994. And just like Ms. Zhou from the MOE said, like 30 years ago, Taiwan studies really wasn't a real thing, right? At the time, it was kind of embedded in Chinese studies, and we're really glad to be, this year is our 28th year, and every year we have an annual conference. And I think that's our way to try to contribute to the field of Taiwan studies. And we are a graduate student-led nonprofit organization, even though I'm the project assistant professor now. When I was elected president, I was still a grad student, so I didn't shoot. We're actually a grad student organization. And then our conference this year is in about 10 days. It's from 8 to 10 of July in George Washington University. And then this year's theme is called Taiwan Studies and Application. We're trying to kind of expand our imagination of what Taiwan Studies is and can be. Of course, we'll still have our well-founded tradition of maybe social studies and cultural studies and stuff like that. But we will try to branch out to more of the think tanks and because we're going to do it in DC, and it's a really good chance to kind of collaborate with local NGOs and NGOs. Okay, and this is our pretty new logo here, and this is our visual for this year. So I thought I would show it to you. And as you know, this panel's title is "Making Taiwan in Conflict." And some people might ask, why is a NATSA panel about conflict? And just a little bit about observation from a conference organizer. In 2018, the NATSA conference was in UT Austin. And then throughout that conference, and then the next year, which is actually in UW in 2019, and our previous conference, which was online, what we observed is that there are multi-level conflicts about Taiwan. That what is Taiwan? How to be a Taiwanese, right? And what's going to happen to Taiwan? And then, so we observe conflicts in different forms and different levels. And whenever there is a conflict, then people will try to solve it. And in the solving of conflicts, whether or not you can succeed, usually you will find new possibilities and new way of seeing things. And then because it's like human nature to try to solve conflicts, is actually a very good drive to kind of keep asking questions and keep trying to find answers. So here are some of the answers, or some of the answers that we attempt to look at what is Taiwan, right? And then what is Taiwanness and what is Taiwanese? Okay, so I'm going to. Okay, so this is my actual title, Making Taiwan in Family Conflicts. This is part of my doctoral dissertation. It's based on my years of dedication to the LGBT movement in Taiwan. Okay, that's that. And this is a little bit of the background of why my study is what it is. So if you kind of recall, actually as early as 1996 and all the way to today, there have been actually quite huge conflicts, social conflicts surrounding the issue of LGBTQ. Here I'm going to use the term 同志 because that's how we call it in Taiwan. It's easier to pronounce. So the 同志 issue has actually been the center of conflict for a very long time, right? Taiwan So martial era was lifted in like the end of 1980s. And as early as 1996, it started to, like, 同志 issues started to be source of conflict. In 1996, Tongguang Church, which is a pro-同志rights church, was established. And very same year, there was protest from other Christian churches against the establishment of a 同志friendly church. Year 2000, Taiwan has the first 同志 event that was sponsored by the government. It was sponsored by the Taipei city government, and then also had the first international 同志forum. And remember, that was the year Chen Shui-bian became president. It was the first, right? It was a very, very important year. And of course, then the first organized protest from, well, need to preface, not all Christian churches are the same, not all Christians are the same, but the opposition is still largely based in Christian churches. So the first organized protest was in year 2000 against this event. So this is a 同志 event that's happening in Taipei, but the international 同志forum was actually a national level forum. It was hosted by the presidential house. So that was, some scholars argue, was because of the failed international, it was like a very rough patch of international relations for Taiwan, starting from the 70s all the way to the 90s, right? We're losing allies and we're becoming marginalized. So it was sort of like a intentional take for Taiwan's government to show that, oh, we are really gender friendly, right? We're really progressive and stuff like that. So they protest, and then the first Pride Parade in 2013, and they protested. And very importantly, Exodus Taiwan was founded in 2003. Exodus is a movement to correct people's homosexuality. So basically, those both happened in 2003 and in 2011. Something happened there and a protest there. Something happened there and protested all the way to today. So the previous biggest event was the 2019 legalization of same-sex marriage. And then the opposition has now shifted their attention to gender equality education, which includes the issue of consent. So I'm not going to go into all the details of that, but I just want to show you a little bit of the background of why this conflict has been consistent and has been kind of, it's like lingering, it's like an undercurrent of whatever that's going on. Especially right now, Taiwan takes such pride in our same-sex marriage. Like, we're being the first nation in Asia to do that. But we do have to remember that a lot of conflict were there along the way and still ongoing. And then one of the most important source of conflict was the 2018 referendum. I'm just gonna just very briefly. So 2018 referendum was the first referendum after the referendum law was massively amended, and it became much easier to propose a referendum bill for people to vote on. And then so unprecedentedly, we had 10 cases to be voted on. So starting from case number 7 all the way to case number 16. And this is called a cheat sheet. When people like go into the poll, they have to take a look at it and see how they vote. Part of the reason is there wasn't enough time to educate people on all the issues because they're very complicated issues. So people just like give out this cheat sheet. But you can see a very interesting trend is that these 3 are on the same side, while the rest of the referendum is on this other side. So what's happened is that, so these 3 cases are about same-sex marriage and also just 同志 rights in general. And this is a KMT proposed issues, also KMT affiliated proposed issues. And this one, number 13, is actually about whether we should use the name of Taiwan in the Tokyo Olympics. And then these 2 are, quote, same-sex marriage. So you can see these, 2 different issues are actually combined. And they actually rally together, right? They go out on the street together, these 2 different events, the 2 different groups, and they will try to collect people's signature. And this actually became a very interesting example of how 同志 issues actually becomes a national identity issue. And it's just a very interesting example. And then of course the 2014, the Stonewall movement, the so-called 318 movement also kind of brought this new generation of awakened young Taiwanese. And that fueled a very important conflict that I'm going to pay attention to, which is the generational divide. So the generational divide is along the way of their Tongzi identity, of how they view what Taiwanese is. A lot of my participants who are Tongzi themselves, but who are also the 318 movement generation. And then they're like, if I am a Taiwanese, right, in 2019 and 2018, right, the new Taiwanese has to support Taiwan independence, right? We have to support using our own name in international games like that. And then, so in the past, a lot of time, the generational divide is in maybe different moral value, maybe different political affiliation, but because of the 318 and because of this referendum, it pushes a generational divide more manifestly along whether you support same-sex marriage. And that becomes it's like a test, right? If you fail the test, it's really hard to justify calling yourself a Taiwanese in this age. But of course, not everyone agrees with that. But I want to focus on the generational divide, the generational conflicts that happens within family, within household. So my research is actually on family conflicts surrounding the Tongzi identity. So a little bit messed up, but basically, let's look at this comment. This guy sitting there, the parents, and he finally said, "That's it. I can't keep it any longer. Mom, Dad, I'm gay." And the mom apparently lost the bet. So it's like they already knew, right? They're just waiting for the son. They're like, okay. So apparently she thought he was not, and then he thought he was, and right. So this was actually a very iconic understanding of what coming out is. So for a very, very long time, coming out in the dominant literature, which is based mostly in US and West European countries, is that coming out is disclosure. That's right, you disclose and then you're out. Okay. So disclosure is a turning point. When you say it, you became, so you were closeted, now you become out, right? Your secret was unknown, now it's known because you disclose. So the act of disclosure has been the center of all this theorizing. And all of these studies, all the way from 1980s to today, they just use coming out and disclosure interchangeably. But what I found very weird from my two decades long dedication to the Tongzi movement in Taiwan is that doesn't seem to be how we think of coming out. You ask people, have you come out? The answer is not simple. Okay. But using coming out as disclosure, the literature usually focuses on either the predictor of disclosure, right? What prompts people to disclose, the content of disclosure, or the implications of disclosure, and sometimes the parents' immediate reaction to disclosure. But I'm going to show you a conversation, like a short dialogue. And that happens in this space. This is where I did my field work, but you cannot see people's faces. One of the new members of a parent support group, so she joined the support group shortly after the Supreme Court in Taiwan ruled that the recognition of same-sex marriage was unconstitutional. So the mother came and said that, okay, now that the country, well, the state is going to recognize my daughter's sexuality, I probably should catch up on how to support her. That's why she came, and then so other mothers said, oh, that's good that you're here. And they asked her, when did your daughter come out to you? And she replied, do you mean when did she tell me, or when did I accept her? So you can see from this short answers that there at least are two different time points in what we think of as coming out. So my dissertation really is just trying to figure out what does it mean when Taiwanese come to say, I have come out, or coming out, what does that mean? And it's in that process, I realized there's so much conflict and then linking to the identity of Taiwanese, even to our national identity, our future and stuff like that. But just zooming in on my actual dissertation. So the research question is, plain language is, what does coming out mean to Taiwanese? But because academics need to talk a little bit more complicated, so that's a research question. Then I use grounded theory to analyze my data. My data came from 3 waves of interviews, starting from 2014 to 2019, and also field observation. In a nutshell, in case I didn't have time to go through this complicated model, in a nutshell, coming out is a process of conflict reconciliation, of finding new ways of identifying and relating. It looked pretty on my own thing, and then it doesn't look pretty here. Sorry about that. Okay. So coming out is no longer just disclosure, or it's not disclosure. It's not about disclosure. It is really a process of conflict reconciliation. And it looks kind of like this. Okay. So you cannot see it, but the green bar are the larger social and cultural historical context for all this relating to happen. So the coming out process starts with that there's a discrepancy in what the offspring wants in their lives and what the parent wants. And then because they realize there's a discrepancy, and they will try to do a lot of things to find this mutually intelligible acceptance. Like the way it's like, I want my mom to love me, but I need to figure out how to do that, right? And the mom is like, oh, I want my daughter to marry like a normal person. And they would try to do a lot of different things that I call scaffolding efforts, because they scaffold to try to reach this mutually intelligible acceptance. And how they do that is through something that I call constant comparisons of related. That is, they would try to figure out, okay, what situation am I in? And what is going on now? What do I do? And they would try to compare to different experiences and to different ideology. Once they figure out, okay, this is probably a situation I'm in, they would try to do something. And the scaffolding efforts are the things they do. So this is them trying to figure out what's going on, try to decide what to do, and this is they're actually doing. And the reason this is like that, it's a iterative process. People go back and forth. Right? They try to reach this, but sometimes it's very difficult. They go back and forth, or they're like, okay, maybe I should do that. Maybe that will push our relationship toward what I think is acceptable, but then they backfire. It happens a lot. So you go back and forth, and for a lot of people, this process actually never ending. It's always ongoing. It's like, well, the classic parent-child relationship dynamics, kind of like that. So this is a constant comparison. I'm not going to go into that, just to tell you there are different types of comparison. For example, people may use their personal experience as a baseline for comparison. Because I went through it, that is how the world works, okay? So it doesn't matter how diverse the world is, because I went through it, that's definitely how the world works. So for a lot of lay people, that is just really how they see the world, through their own experience. Of course, there's social comparison, and they measure against the norms, they measure against authority, or like something really bad, really drastic happened, and then all of a sudden, oh, maybe this doesn't matter that much. So these are different kinds of comparison, especially the measuring against authority. One mother, even she had an oracle from the God brought to her by a colleague. A colleague one day, when she came into the office, the colleague just walked to her and said, God told me, like one of the Taoism gods, he said, your daughter is a boy soul in the girl's body, and the God wants you to accept her. And the colleague just walked away, and that mother is like, what just happened? And at the time, the daughter was just like 8, and so the daughter hadn't even come out to the mother. But yeah, it's just different ways of comparison. But I want to focus on the ending part, this part. So the probably never-ending process of relating. And it goes back to the 2018 referendum again. just like I said, this process is ongoing, it's iterative, and it's really complicated. People try so much to try to reach that acceptance. But it is like major social event like this that kind of help them reset their goals. The 2018 referendum, for some of the parents, it's a chance for me to show my support, right? To really, stand up for their kids. And a lot of the parents really became an ally because of the 2018 conflict was too bad. And then some of the kids were like, okay, right now it's a good chance for me to get them on board, right? They probably wasn't like, oh, I probably shouldn't do it. It's gonna bring more conflict. But right now, because of the 2018 referendum, it's about national pride. It's about who you are as a Taiwanese. It's about who I am. I'm going to be a proud Taiwanese Hongzhi. And this kind of social event gave them a sense of urgency to really push for their interpersonal relationship to change because they want to match that to their national identity. Okay, so I think that's all the time I have. I just want to answer this final question. So what Taiwanness is seen and made through the lens of conflict and conflict reconciliation. So I think the first is that I think a lot of the social progress is actually made along conflicts, and it's really hard to not have conflicts, especially when you have a diverse and vibrant society. In a democratic society, nonetheless, there will be a lot of different ideologies. And just like the first slide that I have, the two sides, the opposition and the proponents, they're like constantly trying to outdone one another. But it is through that, like new ways of thinking are possible. And of course, one of the ways that I think this research contributes to Taiwan studies is that this really is a new theory of thinking about coming out, based solely in Taiwan's data. And my dissertation won the Best Dissertation Award in the National Communication Association. And in their comments, it's really a lot about, okay, we have never thought of this, right? Because we're so kind of confined in the understanding that coming out is disclosure, and this dissertation can broaden that discussion. So that will be that. Thank you for allowing me 1 more minute. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rita. So we'll have some time for a discussion on that. The process of coming out. Like I said, personally, I read the paper. I think it's fabulous. Our next speaker will be Zhihan. Now, I forgot to mention that because the conference told me that each speaker will have 15 minutes, but I don't see,
How should I
if we extend to like that to 20 minutes, that should be fine. So, but I am going to be here reminding our speakers, and I'll be holding up a sign of how many minutes they actually have left. So, okay. So, without further ado, let's start with Jim. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Shihan Wu, and I am a candidate in drama and theater at the University of California, Irvine. And thank you, Dominic. Thank you, Dr. Yan, for introducing my research topic and introducing me. I am the president-elect for NATSA 2023, and thank you all for your support for NATSA. And I'm truly excited to be here and share a bit of my research with you today. The paper I'm presenting is called Performative Reckoning, Memory, Trauma, and Avatar. And it is certainly something extremely from Rita's research in terms of like subject and approach and methodology, all things. However, we all kind of like touch upon keywords such as generational conflict. I also talk about generational conflicts, but more in terms of memories, how memory is generated and presented. And also we all talk about like collective actions and practices, which also kind of like perfectly resonate with NATSA this year's conference theme, Taiwan Studies and Application. So without further ado, I will just jump right into it. So have you forgotten or are you too afraid to remember? So set in the 2D horror game video game Detention, created and developed by Red Candle Games. Set in 1960 Taiwan under martial law, the game begins with two students, Wei Zhongfu and Fang Ruixing, finding themselves trapped in the school they attended, which has now become unsettling and haunted by malicious monsters. While the two are hiding from the ghosts, quote-unquote ghosts, the school's darkest path has been slowly unveiled. So this research elucidates how detention as a role-playing video game provides an embodied experience through reenactment of the past and confronts historical memories as well as representations of trauma. So I asked, how do avatars as a mechanism to redress the hidden historical atrocity and traumatic experiences shape the experience of game players? And this paper, like Dr. Yin said, it is actually a part of a bigger research project, like dissertation research, that used puppetry as a lens to look at Taiwan's cultural, historical, political, and societal environments. And while recognizing that video game is itself a product of modern media and interactive digital technology, this paper, my research, specifically examines avatars and role-playing from the perspective of performance studies and theatrical practices, because I'm from theater and drama department. And this research shed light on avatars as puppets and produced and manipulated by modern technologies and in computer-generated environments. So what comes before this specific paper is the sense of uncanny likeness between white terror victims and puppets or avatars. My argument is that though they are all manipulated, quote-unquote, manipulated by known or unknown manipulators, they are not entirely deprived of agency. And this feeling and experience of limited agency is what the game tries to recreate, not the history itself. So the connection between human players and game avatars, as well as the notion of human manipulation, offers Taiwanese players and gamers around the world a chance to peek into historical memories as if they were a part of it. While the players are trying to solve the mystery through 魏仲廷 and Fang Ruixing's avatars, they are also experiencing, witnessing, and reenacting the past. Gameplay allows the players to encounter the past while recognizing their present. It's where playing from now at this point. In addition to the temporality, the cross-spatiality of the game between the virtual and the actual world also adds layers to the gameplay experience that navigates national trauma without being immersed in that empathetic emotions and failing to distinguish between the fictional setting and the historical context. So just as Coleman argues, virtualness is constituted precisely by the meta-awareness of this gap between the actual and the virtual. So I think my argument is that detention revisits history and tells stories previously untold, or censored, or suppressed, or silenced, and that go beyond the mere representation of trauma. It is through this recognition of the gap between the actual and the virtual or the fictional that the game's unrealness provides the players a sufficient distance to learn, relearn, and unlearn the past. So this is a brief outline of the paper. Due to time limit, I probably won't be able to go through all of them, but this is just how the paper looks like. So Sophia Lee Chun-Ling points out in her book that the recollection of Taiwan's past mirrors the symptoms of a trauma patient in the sense of delayed response caused by government-imposed amnesia, referencing technical theory of trauma. And in fact, the delayed response and the amnesia, whether coerced in order to suppress dissidence or as a psychological defense against trauma, indeed pose a hindrance to accessing the past. Survivors of the atrocities yet struggle their entire lives with post-traumatic issues, both physically and mentally, combined with social marginalization. Yet this amnesia is not exclusive to those who suffer, but also impacts the later generation who are never given the chance to address or redress trauma, besides learning about it through mediated means of literature, cinema, and other forms of representation. So to make connection to our theme of this session, what are the conflicts addressed in this research? I think the conflict exactly lie in the inevitable gap between the actual historical events and how they are perceived by the post-national trauma generation through diverse means of literary, media, and artistic representations. And these post-memories or second-hand memories or mediated memories are generated and may easily be mistaken as the actual truth, if there is any. And what makes detention unique and different from other means of representation, I would say, is that it asks for players' active engagement to create their own personal connections to the past. And for a horror game like this, it is never about how authentic history is represented or delivered, but about how it is felt, how it is experienced. And those still pretty much pre-programmed, because games are all pre-programmed, Players are asked to take part in the decision-making and speculation, which demonstrate how the past is continuously reimagined while shaping the present and potentially the future at the same time. So role-playing games, often referred to as RPGs, are games in which players take responsibility for acting out, act out the roles of characters in a fictional setting and within the narrative. This acting usually involves a series of structured decision-making regarding character development or plot progression. In role-playing video games, players are always represented or appear as avatars in the virtual world. And to make connection to my personal research, avatars are just like puppets, real, actual physical puppets, have their roots in the incarnation of embodiment of deities, of gods. And with similar features, some scholars and puppet artists actually perceive avatars as puppets created and manipulated in new technologies. And this is how my research in puppetry kind of detoured to include avatars. And game avatars are, following Paul descriptions, hope and alterity, and others, a set of disposition, needs, desire, alien to themselves, end quote. In detention, the avatars are like us, the players, and yet not us, as we can only control the avatar's present while the game controls their past. And avatars are also an introjection of the past into ourselves and a projection of ourselves into the past. They embody our vulnerability and powerlessness, since what the avatars or players face is just merely unknown. We don't know what's ahead of us. So I describe detention as a reenactment instead of representation of the past, as I think it better captures the actions involved in the role-playing game. The acts of gameplay and experiencing the recreation of the past in the virtual world are what I would call performative reenactments of the past through avatars. And the experience resonates with what Rebecca Schneider illuminates the notion of reenactment. She described, the past replay was not necessarily given to be seen, rather it was given to be experienced or felt by those who reenacted, end quote. An important nature of RPG is the fact that players are the avatars and live the role of the game. While playing the game, players are not just attempting to find their way out of this game without being caught by the monsters, but are also witnessing, experiencing, and living this fictionalized historical moment with and as the characters. So the past is then kind of laced with the present, and this is not only just a cross-temporal snippet, but also a cross-spatial one, or what Vector Turner would what we call liminality. Because this liminality occurred between the actual victims from the past and the players in the present, and as well as the virtual, the avatar, and the real, the players. And this liminal space of game invites players to experience the touch of time and space. So gameplay and role-playing are also associated with twiceness and repetition. Twiceness and repetition, which are ideas used in performance studies attributed by Richard Schaffner. While players have to start over at a certain stage, they are reliving the life that has already happened with a different approach. These reduce and start overs are composed in reiteration, engaged in citation, and are a practice of reenactment. And such reenactment becomes a hypercharged repetition that trips the otherwise daily condition of repetition into a really reflexive, hyperdrive, expanding the experience into the uncanny. So the avatar's capability to repeat, redo, and re-experience a series of events has the potential to alter the meaning of trauma and death, as repetition push into something entirely outside this linear narrative time. Because you can divert into other way and then come back, and you choose, based on your choice, you have different endings in that sense. And on top of that, players gain new knowledge and understanding of the world and the stories through these reduce and retry and repetition and twiceness. So to delve deeper into the relationship between players and avatars, both of them are witnesses to the sufferings of the victims in the game. They have no control over the situation or alter the character's destiny as it is programmed or fated. Though the essence of RPG is players' freedom and power to choose and decide the progress of the story through their avatars, players are not omnipotent. They don't know much other than what they're offered. Despite seeing all the inhumane deeds like in the game, nothing can the players do to actually halt those scenes. They are like fated to happen in the game. The players have to face the horror in order to continue their journey and learn about what truly happened before they enter the game. So this game challenges the post-generational Taiwanese to confront and acknowledge the trauma and atrocity and know where we see ourselves and we imagining these historical memories. And additionally, as a horror game, the fear and detention lies in the unknown and the uncontrollable. So theatricality emerges as a gap between the real and the illusion, and between the past and present are just like blur. You kind of don't know like which moment you're in and which space you're in. So gameplay lands in the space where one's sense of self devolves to some extent, bringing the disorientation, but also the possibility of a new perspective. So during the game, players as avatars are requested to pay attention to the description of each object in the game to find out what happened and what is going to happen next. So in fact, this process of detangling mystery can be interpreted as fundraising's journey to redemption. As the game plot progresses, players start to realize that it is Ray, it is fundraising, the character that they have been identifying with, who becomes a traitor by disclosing the smuggling of censored book and divulging teachers and members of the book club involved. And I think this plot is very similar in both the films and the game. So fundraising's information leads to the arrest and execution of the book club members, and Hui Zhongting, the first character to appear in the game, is sentenced to 15 years in prison. While fundraising is awarded by the officials, the guild counts her. Eventually, she commits suicide at the school. So players enter this game uninformed, not knowing anything, just like Ray, fundraising, waking up in obliteration and then regretting that she was actually the cause of this hauntedness at the very beginning of the game. So players later realize that, oh, we are the informer and are made to become the cause of the horror. And they are no longer innocent or outsiders to the story or to this history. They are like witnesses, victims, and perpetrators all at the same time. So there are two endings to the game, detention. In one version, fundraising passes by the river of blood that appears in the first scene. But this time, there are like bodies all over the river. And finally, she arrives at the auditorium where she was awarded and eventually hangs herself. So everything seems to kind of like start over from the very beginning in this version. What the character tries to escape is not the Countess' goal, but her own shame and guilt. The other ending days years later, after being released from prison, Hui Zhongting, much older now, visits the school. So Hui Zhongting sits at a table inside a deserted classroom, reflecting on the past. Across from him is the ghost of fundraising, looking remorseful and sitting solemnly. The two gaze at each other, reminiscing about the bygone era. So this is the second ending. So are there, like one of the questions I was asked a lot while doing this research is that, are there any like forgiveness or reparation in detention? So I think like the first ending can be construed as a return to that never-ending cycle of guilt and forgetting, just like forget what has happened. While the second one suggests acceptance and potential or possible reconciliation. One of the lines in the second ending writes, no matter how many times this replays, nothing can be unworked. And eventually, no single antagonist is to be blamed for the tragedies in detention. Instead, a multitude of structural and institutional circumstances conspire to render Ray and fundraising and by extension the players powerful yet simultaneously powerless. What has happened cannot be undone, yet players can involve themselves in remembering these incidents. And this engagement in truth-seeking and collective remembering is inherently what I would call performative. And like aforementioned, traumatic events are often like followed by amnesia. Despite that, trauma is not remembered. It does not simply disappear, it is just like suppressed and persists in a different manner. It leaves traces and sometimes it's passed down to the next generations. And detention works to kind of like invoke players' attention, curiosity, and interest to kind of like feel the trauma, name it, and recognize its impact. And additionally, though the game touches upon embodied experience of historical trauma, they contend with mediated interrogation of role-playing critically, in which the space and staging are in fact more like ponderous instead of immersive. The aesthetics and designs of detention are very realism, as you can see. It's not like real. It's not like 3D model, very real, very human-like. And this kind of like a version of realism creates a natural distance or sense of alienation, which prevents traumatization in this sense. And this distance does not make the player's experience less valid or farther away from the actual events, but allows them to feel that touch of time and space when the past and present and the real and the virtual intersect. In the liminal and transitional space of the game, the boundary and relationship between oneself, the world, and the past encounter, interweave, and further reconstructed. And this is just a little bit of my very preliminary research of detention. I really like this game. And that's all I would like to share.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now for our final speaker, we will have to have her join us long distance. So Yong-Ying, is Yong-Ying ready to present? Okay, Yong-Ying, can you hear us? Can she hear us? So Yong-Ying's talk is going to be about online K-pop.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Yong-Ying. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so yeah, it's your time. 15 minutes. Yeah, go ahead, Yong-Ying.
Okay. Can you see my face?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so thank you so much, Dr. Dominic Yan. So hello everyone. My name is Yong-In Zhang from Rutgers University, and I'm happy to have this opportunity to share my work with you. I'm not able to. I'm sorry. I'm not able to attend the conference in person, unfortunately, because I got positive for COVID 3 days ago, and I have a hoarse voice now, so I can't speak too fast. Apologize for that. So let me just start my presentation. Can you see my slide? Okay. Wait.
Yes.
Yong-Ying, I think you cannot control because it's like projected here. I can control it for you. That works.
Okay. Then when I say next page, can you just have me? Okay, sure. Thank you. Okay, so so a little bit background. Okay, so the title of my work is Political Talk in Cultural Arenas, a sociological account of group culture as a pathway. Yeah, this is the title of my work. And next, yeah, thank you. Background. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So people talk about politics or act politically in non-political spaces. For example, more than half of online chat rooms. Sorry. Sorry for. Can you use the slide I just upload to?
I don't think you can do that. They can only use the previous version.
Okay, it's fine. Let me just continue. Yeah, so people talk or act politically in non-political spaces, and like more than half of online chat rooms for recreation or sociability involve political discussion, and many people develop political engagement from their participation in leisure activities or popular culture consumption. Why? Why do people talk or act about politics in non-political spaces? Existing research has revealed the potential reasons. For example, media technologies such as the internet, blurring the boundaries between political and cultural realms, or people cultivate skills in cultural activities such as deliberation that help their participation in the larger public life. Or people do not trust traditional political institutions and choose to engage in politics through practices in daily life, which is the so-called lifestyle politics. However, few have examined how this process takes place, which is super important. because political talk is part of political activity, and understanding how people talk about politics and form political beliefs in cultural areas of social life helps us understand how the public sphere operates in shaping people's ideas and practices, and how political talk in private sphere bears on their participation in public life. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So this is my research question. My goal is to understand how political beliefs develop from cultural areas of social life that are not explicitly political. And I use K-pop fandom as a case to explore specifically how emotional attachment, which is an important feature of K-pop fandom, and group culture play a role in shaping political beliefs within communities organized around cultural products. Next slide. Okay. So K-pop is a valuable case for answering my research question because K-pop fandom is a cultural arena that is not explicitly political, but a lot of political discussions and debates and expressions of political beliefs are taking place in this arena. People in K-pop fandom talk about and debate politics because on the macro level, the transnationalization of K-pop brings a lot of conflicting interests and desires to this arena. The global fan base, multinational idol members, local distributors in outside of Korea, and transnational sponsors and investors, among which China takes a leading role, all render K-pop a cultural arena that allows politics and historical memory intersect, creating transnational desire and conflict simultaneously. And also at the individual level, fans have political expectations of stars. They hope stars align with them on political issues. Altogether, K-pop fandom provides an excellent case to understand how people talk about politics and form political beliefs in places. Okay, next slide. So I chose K-pop fandom in Taiwan and non-Asian contexts to collect data. Taiwanese fandom is significant because it's a growing pop culture consumption genre in Taiwan, and a lot of political debates in K-pop are centered on Asian politics, including Taiwan and its relationship with China, and also with other countries in this area. I interviewed 30 Taiwanese K-pop fans and 9 non-Asian fans and conduct a digital ethnography on PTT Korea Starboard and Reddit R K-pop. These two online platforms are the two prevalent online communities for K-pop fans in Taiwan and the English language world. And for this presentation, I will only focus on the part of Taiwanese fans. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the overview. Sorry. I argue that the group culture of K-pop fandom communities leads fans to make explicit their existing political beliefs or encourages them to develop new political beliefs. I find that group culture regarding political talk within fandom communities is ambivalent, as this diagram shows. It simultaneously encourages contention over politics and the pursuit of apolitical neutrality, which reflects fans' ongoing and unsettled negotiations between the emotional commitment of stars and nations. And this ambivalence within group culture about politics makes political talk more common while forcing fans to deal with their conflicting emotional commitments that cannot be resolved by simply claiming the value of apolitical neutrality. Therefore, having clear positions on political issues has become an option for fans to balance their conflicting emotional commitments. Now, I'm going to parse out the specific group culture that simultaneously fosters contention over politics and the value of apolitical neutrality. Next slide. Yeah, so first of all, I found that Finns extensively engage in moral boundary work. So they evaluate stars and fellow Finns as morally good or bad based on their perceptions of others regarding politics. And it's usually the contentious issues of nationhood or geopolitics between Taiwan and China that Finns use to evaluate others. For example, Ting Ting is a Taiwanese Fin, and this is the quote from her. I used to be a super fan of Sohyun from Girls' Generation for a very long time, until one day she said she admired Pan Ki-moon. I don't like him. The way he managed the UN peacekeeping mission and how he treats Taiwan was awful, so I stopped loving her anymore. Pan Ki-moon is a Korean politician who was a former Secretary General of the United Nations, and for Ting Ting, because this politician are friendly to Taiwan, she classified the K-pop star who admired that politician as a quote-unquote bad star and decided to stop her love for this star. Next slide, please. And this is the quote from Taiwanese fan Mindy, which shows what fans evaluate as good stars. BTS company teach them well. They speak different language according to where they perform. They spoke in Taiwanese rather than Mandarin. It's really awesome. So the moral boundary work is super popular among K-pop fans, but most of the time boundaries are actually very hard to draw because fans have to undertake a lot of emotional risk following those debates, such as ending their support of stars with unfavorable political opinions, or implicating the stars in political debates and endangering those stars' careers. So I think next slide. So this brings us to the second result, which is the value of apolitical neutrality. So although they debate politics and engage in moral boundary work frequently, they claim that apolitical neutrality is desirable. So they do the two things at the same time, which sounds really paradoxical. This is the quote from Taiwanese fan Yolanda. She said, "We had better not talk about any political issues because it's always in vain when you try to communicate with someone having different political opinions from you. It's a waste of time." And this is from another Taiwanese fan, Vera. She said, "I don't want stars to get into those political troubles." Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is a discussion. Although claiming that apolitical neutrality is desirable, fans in fact make sense of politics through debating with each other. Declaring apolitical neutrality while failing to achieve it forces fans to find a way to navigate their conflicting emotional commitments between stars and nations. Therefore, the ambivalence within the culture of K-pop fandom communities makes explicit fans' existing political beliefs or encourages them to develop new political beliefs, as fans take political stances in the service of balancing their emotional commitment. I think next slide. Yeah, implications. So these findings are consistent with prior research on the relationship between group culture and political engagement. Group culture can structure the specific ways political discussion and engagement occur and proceed within bounded collectives. Moreover, this study considers the factors of emotions and attachment in orienting people's participation in public life, which has been less developed in the existing scholarship using a group approach. And last, there are increasing studies tap into how pop culture celebrities or consumers mobilize for social movement, such as in the US context, the Black Lives Matter movement. But contrary to that, this study helps us understand the dynamic process in which pop culture fans engage in politics that does not necessarily lead to consistent and so-called successful activism. Next slide. I think this is the last slide. Yeah, making Taiwan in conflict. So this study reveals how some Taiwanese people make sense of and debate about politics in cultural areas of social life, through which they develop or reinforce the formation of their political beliefs. So conflicts are valuable for civic culture, and ongoing group interaction does not necessarily rest on harmony or excluding conflict. So understanding conflict in Taiwan's context with a group focused everyday life lens helps us understand a more dynamic and nuanced Taiwan in the making. Okay, so I think this is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry for my voice.
Thank you, Yomi. Thank you very much for keeping your time. You actually did everything under 15 minutes. That's extremely impressive.
Somebody did it.
Yes. So we will now move on to the discussion, a general discussion for this panel. Now, so the conference told me that I should be really fielding questions for the audience. I'm inclined to do that. I think we'll have some time left for that. I am going to use my chair's prerogative to ask the first three questions to our three presenters here. I read the papers. They're all wonderful papers. I enjoy reading them very much. And I think the papers really fit well within the general framework of this panel, because we're looking at different conflicts, right? The conflicts within the family, conflicts about gender identity, conflict of historical memory of white era, and conflict of national identity. Conflict of national identity on social media, on fan-based discussion groups, the most unlikely place for these kind of discussions. So these are definitely, I would call really interesting and pioneering research. So I'm really looking forward to, the publications actually based on these research. Now I have, three questions for each of our speakers. For Rita, I was wondering that if you can just elaborate, because I know you sort of run out of time at the very end, sort of elaborate on this idea of partial acceptance or partial recognition on the part of parents towards their children's gender identity, because you are actually making an extremely important point about this sort of coming out of the closet model, right? That actually sort of originated from this Europe-American understanding of the LGBTQ experience. And it's like, oh, there's a watershed moment, there's a turning point. When that happened, everything's fine, or not everything's fine. You get some kind of sort of, either a resolution, reconciliation, or you get a permanent severing of relationship, right? You get something. But according to your research, it's not that. Sometimes the parents will accept, but then they will act in a certain way that still, goes back to their sort of patriarchal ideas of what ideal family and gender relationship will be like, and I think that idea of partial acceptance or partial recognition is actually quite important. I would like you to sort of elaborate on that a little bit. For Zhihan, I'm really impressed with this paper because, as a person who deals with trauma memory, Of course, my previous book deal with the mainlander trauma. Now I am working more specifically on the issues of white terrorists and transitional justice, and especially trauma memory theory. This is an extremely interesting paper for me to read. Now, my question is that, and of course, before I go on with my question, in my own panel, I'll be talking about white terror history, and you will see that the way in which this detention story, I mean, the narrative was actually constructed, was, it's a type of white terror history in the 1950s. You could say it's the dominant type, but there is another dominant type actually in the military that I'm going to talk about, and a lot more people were actually executed in the military, and most of them are mainlanders. So you can see how that shaped our memory. So there is a difference between the historical fact, the factual, which is much more complicated and comprehensive in a way than what we choose to sort of collectively remember. Right, and so that's a side point, but it's also a very important point that comes out of Zhihan's paper. But then comes the question. The question I really want to ask is, because this idea of game playing as a way of, because I'm a person who deal with transitional justice and white terror, a lot of us are concerned with public education, pedagogy. Of course, we understand this is entertainment. A company developed a game to make money, right? But also, if you look at their agenda, promoting Taiwanese experience in history, you see that they also try the next generation to learn something from it. So my question is the perennial question, that we always think about as people who study white terror, this idea of education or public pedagogy versus entertainment. Like because this research on this kind of game playing, as you say, restricted agency. It's not like you go to another form of public education will be like, I go to a public library, read a book, or I go to the National Human Rights Museum to look at the exhibition. And that was usually not interactive, right? But what you're talking about here is a type of, as you say it very well, performative enactment. It requires that person to be involved, like at least spiritually, within the storyline, and to change the results of it, right? To experience it. So and I mean, this is a big question. What is your, what can you see from the potential of this kind of restricted agency towards, the goal of sort of promoting transitional justice and white terror? Is it different from other sort of format, a pedagogical format that we see? I mean, that will be a very interesting sort of question to think about. The third question I have is, of course, for Yungying. Let me try to find my note. When reading that paper, I was like, a question just creep up in my mind all the time. Have you thought about interviewing PRC K-pop, online users, right? I mean, is there, because in terms of your sample selection and methodology, right? I think those are generally fine, but I think it would be much more interesting story if you sort of include some of the Chinese online users who are also K-pop fans, and in those discussion group into your interviewing sample. And is there a reason for you not to do that? I just want you to sort of elaborate on that a little bit. And I have other questions, but I think I'll leave it at that and let our speakers answer. Then we'll come back for a final round of questions from the audience. Okay. Yes. I think, Paul, that will be a great idea. So yes, please. Yeah. Go ahead.
One thing I studied in my fine justice trial was insane. When the insane person also
Okay. Yep, that's a great question. Since I only asked them each of them one question, I think, I don't think why not we'll open, for the audience also to contribute at this time, because we'll come back to do another round to see if anyone has any question towards any of the three speakers. Now is the time. Yes. Okay, also for Zhihan. Okay. Okay.
Feedback. So I really like the way Zhihan shifts the focus of representation towards reenactment. So that really highlights the kind of medium specificity of video games as cultural text. So I have a kind of like an outsider question for you, because as a film and literature scholar, I usually don't deal with a lot of video games. So I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on the kind of potentialities or limitations that video games as cultural text can illuminate on the issue of reenacting traumatic history.
Okay. Wonderful. Anyone else? Okay, we have two more. Okay, after these two, because Zhihan already taken on 3 questions. So my rule is, no more than 3 questions for a person, because that will be really hard on it. Is the question for Zhihan? Okay, it's fine. Okay, Zhihan. So now you're gonna take on 4 questions at once. So go ahead. Can you speak up a little bit? Okay, great. Go ahead. Yes. Yongyin, can you hear us? There's a question on the floor for you. Yongyin, are you still with us online? Yongyin, can you hear us? I don't think she can, but you can ask the question. Yeah, we'll write it down. Okay, yes. Mm-hmm.
Decided whether to start just a channel what they say something about.
Okay, I have written down these questions for Yongyin, so if she can't hear us, we can help relay those questions to Yongyin. Okay, by the way, the first question is the question that I also want to ask, so great question. All right, so I will now, I think we have collected enough questions, including mine, so I will now ask our speakers to respond. Would you like to do that in the order of the speech?
I'll speak fast.
Okay.
First of all, thank you so much for giving me time to talk about the endings part of this model because it's about reconciliation. It's about what I'm just gonna use a child and a parent as an easier way. So the child wants something, right, and the parents want something. Ideally, there is some kind of overlap. Sometimes there is no overlap at all. Sometimes, and then the model shows ideal version that they kind of lean toward each other, but the actual, in reality, it could go any direction. And I call this so in the child's mind, maybe there's a perfect acceptance, right? My mom accepts me 100%, she loves me, and she does this and that. But in reality, a lot of times parents' acceptance is compartmentalized. I use that word compartmentalized because acceptance is a kind of divided into different ways of showing, right? There can be emotional acceptance, attitudinal acceptance, behavioral acceptance, and cognitive acceptance. So for the 14 parents that I interviewed and observed, I would have to say most of them, it's very difficult actually for parents that's like 60 years old to actually fully accept the child. For those who are like even long-time activists in the Tongzi movement, the parents themselves, they're like, the veteran parents, and they coach the new parents on how to go through this process. When they get together, sometimes they will say like, okay, even though we're here, we're parent activists, but when I go to my friend's son's wedding, I still feel sad. I still feel lost, right? And I feel ashamed of their emotions. It's like, shouldn't I be fully accepting my kids? But the reality is actually very difficult. Sometimes there's a very interesting case. A mother is actually pretty okay with the daughter being a lesbian, but because the mother is a pale blue politician. So she said, when I'm out, I have to act like I don't agree with you. I don't approve of you. And then they have an honest conversation. The mom is like, it's just my job. And then there's a very similar case where the mother is in the church. So mom said, when I'm with my church friends, I have to talk about anti-Tongzi things because it's just how I maintain my social life, right? So they compartmentalize in different directions. And I want to touch on something that I find very interesting is that because I have been a Tongzi myself, right? I've been in this movement. I've always seen things from my perspective. And a lot of Tongzi actually see the power in their relationship, like in the parents, right? The parents have the power to accept or reject me. But in this process of like working with the parents, I realized the power is actually in neither places. The parents be like, my kid has all the power, right? They decide to be like this. And it's now my job to try to accept her and try to learn how to do this. And then it's almost like, especially this new parenting discourse, is that if you are a good parent, you have to accept your kid, right? You have to understand your kid, you have to educate yourself. And a lot of the parents feel the pressure to live up to that standard. So even though they don't understand or they're emotionally very, troubling with it, they will try to act like they do. And they will try to go out on the parade and be on the TV just to show that they accept it. So they feel like, the ball is in the kids' court, right? And the kids is like, no, the parents have all the power to decide whether they want me or not. But I feel like, when they kind of falsely imagine the powers in the other side, the process becomes actually even more difficult to reconcile, right? I always feel like I don't have the power. But I have to say, kind of tying toward the second question about how this process is related to a Taiwan national identity formation. Okay. So for the parents, they may give out what I call compartmentalized acceptance, and the child actually see it as discounted acceptance. Rather than you compartmentalize and give me one part, it's like, okay, I want 100% and you're only giving me 80. So now I need to figure out, am I okay with 80 or am I asking more? But they also, I think in this process, they also try to figure out, okay, what is it that I really want? Like, can I articulate what I see as acceptance? One of the participants that I interviewed, she and her mother actually have very close relationship, and the mother is very accepting. But she said, I'm never going to disclose my identity to my mom because my mom will never be those activist moms. She will never be able to go on the street with me. Therefore, I don't think she's okay with it. So even though all the other signs said that, the mother's probably fine. So the compartmentalized and the discounted acceptance in the way of trying to bring those two seemingly divergent things together. And I think in the process of trying to figure out who I am, trying to figure out what I want, especially with the 2018 referendum, that really is like a really important turning point for my participants, not just both the parents and the kid, is that, especially for the kid, which is actually my generation, 30 somethings, So sorry for calling myself a kid. It's just easier easier to pronounce. So this generation kid is like trying to detach from the parents' understanding of what is good, right? What is a good person? You know, what is a good Taiwanese? Like a good citizen of the society, you need to do this and that, right? You will get married, you can have kids, because that's how you contribute to your society. But the kid, because of their Tongzi identity, they are by default not living up to that standard. So in trying to figure out how can I still be a good citizen, how can I still be a good person through my parents' eyes into this society, and try to figure out maybe even if I can, and at that time I still cannot get married, even if I cannot get married, I cannot have a kid, I can still be very vocal for my national identity, right? I can go out on the street. That is how I contribute, right? I can still be a good citizen even if this is not what you want from me. So they try to negotiate like a new version of a good citizenship, you know, in the face of rejection or potential rejection.
Okay.
So I would say, and final note is that actually, the more I do this research, the more I realize that parents feel very powerless, especially in this like new Taiwanese identity formation. They feel like they're the generation cast aside. Right now, my kids' generation is deciding the future, right? And then we have to catch up. I probably don't understand, but I try to catch up, and then feel abandoned and cast aside and like washed away by the generation. So they try even harder to try to reconcile because of that. Thank you for the questions.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's just for me to ask something. I think, you know, when I was reading this paper, I thought one of its biggest contributions is to really bring that parents' perspective and also the social environment compartments like into the discussion, right? It's like, you know, it's like children and parents, they all feel, you know, sort of victimized or traumatized in a certain way, and both trying to sort of feel and that sort of, and it is really different from the LGBTQ literature here. Like, you know, like I said, you know, that has origins in Western society because they tend to be more individualistic as to, you know, it's right-based, but it's focused on basically the gender minority individuals. So yeah, so. Okay, Zhihan, you have to answer a lot of questions in less than 10 minutes. Maybe.
Yeah, I'll be brief. And thank you all for all the questions. And I was actually like extremely nervous to kind of present this paper in this occasion because the reason why I started this research is last year after I was in one of your talks. You talk about a lot of phones, and also you also talk about detention a little bit, and that's kind of like how I really jumped into this research. So I was really anxious. But yeah, thank you all for the feedback. And I want to answer like the 3A and Jessica's questions together because I think they kind of touch on very similar topics. The first is like like Dr. Yan said, there is kind of like a trend, the kind of memory that the government is trying to propose and trying to think, well, if I use this term, to sell to the general public, the kind of like white terror memory, and that is very specific and that is selective and chosen. And so that is indeed one of the problems for all these like detention and other like white terror related literature and artworks, because those are, a lot of them are like sponsored and or are like promoted by, especially like after like 2017, the National Human Rights Museum was established, and they started to kind of fund a lot of these white terror related and transitional justice related projects. And of course, then there is kind of like a specific stance that they try to promote. And that could be potentially one of the problems for all these works after the 2017, because we see an increase in these works by them. But they're also like extremely valuable because we, like both of you said, we kind of, it gets closer to the general public. And in terms of like the problem for detention, one of the problems for detention are all those kind of video games that involve historical memories, or because they're like in South Korea, they also you have a lot of video games that talk about, for instance, like Jeju uprising or Gwangju uprising, or like the comfort women issues during the Japanese colonization in Korea. And all of them share very similar problems, like according to my research, is that these, most of them horror games, they are like they are intentionally horrifying. They kind of like horrifying all these experiences in a very specific way because they still wanted to be like entertaining in that sense. And they are for consumers. They are not necessarily like designed for educational purposes. So that is also one thing I've always been having this conversation with my own advisor, that my advisors keep saying that, well, this is a horror game. Then like, why are we kind of like promoting this sense of horror instead of really talking about what happens beyond this kind of like sugar-coated experience or presentation in these games? So that could be potentially the limitation of video games because they are still for entertainment and they are for consumerism. And additionally is that they're all, like I said, pre-programmed, like detention, although they have you have like 2 endings, but there are just only 2, nothing more than that. So you're still kind of like within this restricted agency or within this restricted narrative. But then the potential for this restricted agency, I would say, is that if I talk about representation, it is more like what the piece gives you or shows you. But then when I use like reenactment, it's then kind of like shift the focus to how this thing is experienced by the players or the receivers or the recipient. And it is like in theater, it is more of the direct emotional response at that specific point because you see it, and then you have that when you're playing this game, you feel like horror and you're like immediately feeling the chilling, have the children feeling in you. So that direct emotional response is how I feel like much more important than any other mediums can give you. And yeah, in terms of the educational means, like I said, after Human Rights Museum was founded in 2017, there are actually like the other of my research focused on like 2 children's puppet shows, and they were staged in the historical sites of injustice in the Jingmei Whitehair Park, Memorial Park. And those plays are not like fancy plays because they're for like children, like 5 years old to like K to 12 children. But then the experience is very important is because they put the children into that actual historical sites of injustice. So when they're watching these plays, they're like experiencing that space at the same time. So that's what I found valuable, very similar to my research of detention, to be like immersed in that environment. And thank you, Dr. Kutz, for the question about the ritual. And actually, like my starting point for this detention research is that there are a lot of use of puppetry in detention, the image of Hu Daixi in detention. That's kind of like my main research, and this is more of a side research. And when we talk about Hu Daixi and the origin of many other puppetry, they have their origins as ritual, as healing, or for the deity, for like worshiping the deities. And by using like Hu Daixi as white terror victims, it kind of resembles another piece that kind of like really comes out in my mind. Is called like Uhu and the Truth Commission, which is a puppet show that talks about South Africa's and Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the 1990s. And the reason why they use puppetry, which I think is also the reason why detention used Hu Daixi puppets as the victim, is to really to warn the viewers not to kind of confuse the actual and the theatrical. And then also like this idea, when you see the death of the puppets, you know that puppets never really die unless you kind of cut it out and kind of like really destroy it. Because in the next show, you'll see the puppets becoming alive again in that setting. So this, I would say, it also involves a certain sense of like trance, because you see the puppet die and go to the backstage, and then in the next scene, you see the puppet alive again. So this ability to kind of relive the life over again without being actually dying kind of can be like healing or therapeutic in that sense. So I know like this is not a really nice answer, but then I think it kind of makes a certain connection. In terms of the last question about post-memory, I also learned this from your talk last year. And it is like proposed by Maria Hirsch. She used the term in the early 1990s and has kind of been redefining them. But basically, she talks about the relationship that the generation after the trauma bears to the personal and collective and cultural trauma. Just like based on the experience they have, they remember through those means of literature or stories and images. So these post-memories are actually like created later instead of the authentic or actual memory of trauma. So she used this term. She used this term to explore like Holocaust survivors and their children's relationship with traumatic memories. So this is also how I make connections to this post-white terror memories. Thank you.
We are 3 minutes over time, and but it's basically just lunch. So do we try to make Yongying a chance to sort of call her? Yongying, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
We have 2 questions for you, including one that's from mine. So actually 3 questions. One from me and 2 from our audiences. For me is why don't you, is there a reason for you not to include any of the PRC K-pop fans into your discussion and your sampling? So that'll be my question. And the second question from the audience is it has to do with your exact methodology when you're doing your digital ethnography, right? How you mine your data and how you get the results. The third question will be the composition of the fans of the, especially one of the Taiwan fans or some of the Taiwan fans that you sort of describe, right? They're extremely sort of pro-Taiwan and Taiwanese nationalists. So I think just one of our audiences just want you to sort of give us a sense of the composition of mostly Taiwanese fans, right? K-pop fans that you sort of encounter on these 2 social media websites. Okay, so go ahead, Yongying.
Yeah, thank you. I really like your question about the PRC K-pop users. Yeah, I did not include them, and I think that's really interesting because that just remind me of some young researchers in Taiwan that I know that they are doing some studies about PRC fans. Fans of Taiwanese music bands with distinct pro-Taiwanese independent political stances. I found that very interesting, and yeah, I mean that has nothing to do with my research, but like Dominic's question just reminds me of that, and I think that's a very cool direction if I want to further develop this research. And for the other 2 questions, the digital ethnography one. So I conduct digital ethnography on PTT and Reddit in the US context from 2016 to 2018 and from 2020 to 2022. I just visit these 2 online platforms at least 1 day a week during the stated periods. And I stayed there for around 15 to 30 minutes. And I took note of what forum users discussed and the way they discussed or argued with each other. And I also pay attention to the trending topics on those online platforms, such as, in the PTT, you will have like the articles with more than 100 approval comments, the 报文, or more than 100 disapproval comments, 虚文, right? So I just pay attention to those trending topics. And I think the point is that digital ethnography has to be used along with other methods. So the interviews and digital ethnography in my research were kind of conduct in support of each other. My observations on PTT or Reddit inform the composition of my interview outlines. So what I observe on PTT will kind of become like my my questions for my interviewees. And I actually also conduct text mining using R language to explore specific political issues that people debate on the PTT. And so that's how I use digital ethnography. The last question. Okay, so I have 27 cisgender female and 3 cisgender male interviewees. And I think their age were from 18 to 35, and they were actually not really like they don't really care about political issues in their daily lives. They kind of just keep a distance from political issues, but somehow when they kind of talk about the political interaction or political issues taking place in K-pop fandom, they kind of become very political or very national, or you can say very nationalistic, and that's one of the things I found very interesting. So I think I don't have too much time to give you too much detail about the my interview. So I think I will just stop here. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Yongying. So a round of applause for Yongying as well. So it's now 12:39, so we're like 10 minutes over time, but I hope that's okay for everyone. So as chair, I hereby conclude the session. Thank you guys very much. Okay, and let's have lunch.